Donald Trump says he's signed the biggest arms deal in history as he begins a 4-day visit to the Middle East. And that's not all. He's also doing deals on other things, AI, energy, and much more. And he says he's lifting all sanctions against Syria as he sets out his vision for the region.
A new generation of leaders is transcending the ancient conflicts of tired divisions of the past and forging a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos, where it exports technology, not terrorism.
But first, we'll hear the latest on a cyber attack against the big British retailer Marks & Spencer. All that coming up on this episode of Newscast. Hello, it's James in the studio, and we will get to that big news, big deals with Donald Trump in the Middle East shortly. But first, we're going to look at what is a British institution, Marks & Spencer, with our cyber correspondent, Joe Tidy. Hi, Joe.
Hi.
And Ciaran Martin, who is the founding chief executive of the National Cyber Security Centre, which is a part of the UK's intelligence and cyber agency, GCHQ. Although, to be clear, Ciaran, you're not there anymore, but Ciaran is with us now.
Not.
Hello, Ciaran. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much for joining us. You're a professor these days, among many, many other things and hats that you wear. But on M&S, Joe, first of all, well, I say M&S, but it's not just M&S. What's going on, right? Here's it's the straightforward, simple newscast starting question. Right. Joe, what's going on?
Well, if we wind back the clocks to when this all started, there was a cyber attack on M&S, which has progressively just got worse and worse and worse over the last 3 weeks since it started. This is a ransomware attack, which means that the hackers have gone into the system, scrambled the data, made it unusable, unreadable to M&S. That's caused what we can see, the damage, the chaos that's been caused. You can't order anything on the internet through the website. Some shelves in some stores have been empty periodically, and we're seeing logistics problems all over the country. And then about the same time, the Co-op was also hit by a cyber attack, which looked very similar and seemed very similar. And after speaking to the hackers, they told me that in the Co-op instance, they stole some data. And Co-op had to come out and say, right, yes, customer data has been stolen.
Wait. You can't just throw in after speaking to the hackers.
Well, yes, I'm afraid. Yeah, they contacted me, and it was bizarre, but we
anonymously, presumably.
Yeah, on Telegram. Yeah.
How can you be sure it's them?
Well,
if the answer to that is you can't really say.
Well, normally you can't really say, but then at the same time, they wanted to contact me because they wanted to admit that they have hacked M&S, Co-op and Harrods. They wanted to exert power and put pressure on the Co-op to pay their ransoms, because that's what this is all about. It's all about money and causing chaos as well. We think the group behind this are pretty keen on causing mayhem and becoming infamous. And when I said, okay, prove that you've got into Co-op, they sent me some irrefutable evidence that it is them.
Now, that's an editorial dilemma, but we'll maybe come back to that. Ciaran, knowing what you know from the very heart of the British security and intelligence apparatus that you used to be involved in, I mean, I'm not asking you because I know you can't tell us everything you know in that regard, but knowing some of what you know, what do you think is the biggest risk here?
I think the biggest risk nationally from a security point of view is the disruption, what we originally saw at M&S. I think it's important that Britain learns the right lesson out of this retail cyber crisis. We get very worked up about data breaches, and some data breaches really matter, and others matter perhaps a little bit less. There's not much information out there that goes further than the traditional phone book, if you like. So what I think I would take from this is the fact that one of Britain's most iconic institutions in M&S has really struggled to provide its basic functions for several weeks. I'm not being overly critical of them. These things are very, very punishing on networks. They take a very long time to restore and recover. So I don't think there's a case for widespread panic amongst the millions of people who shop at and use M&S and the Co-op and even Harrods. I think the real issue for us is our national resilience. Think of These are a bunch of criminals, as Joe said, motivated by money. But think of a determined nation state or a group of paramilitary type actors getting their hands on medium sophistication capabilities like this and doing lots of them at the same time.
And Ciaran, I've heard, just chatting to people, because I find this is something people are talking about, not least because, as Joe says, I've been into M&S recently and I've noticed there are shelves that have been empty and signs up saying we're having technical difficulties.
And in some co-ops as well.
And in some co-ops, my colleague Lorna Gordon, our Scotland correspondent, was in Islay, for example, the Isle of Islay, reporting on the shortages there, which have caused real problems in island communities where the co-op is often the only major store. But Ciaran, what I've noticed in chatting to people about this is that people are now seeing cyber attacks everywhere. So lots of people I've heard talking about this have said things like, oh yeah, and there was that power cut at the fire at Heathrow, and there was those power cuts in Spain and Portugal. And even if they were not cyber attacks, and I think the official position seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they're not.
They're not at the moment. No.
Yeah, exactly. But it does it not float what you're saying, the possibility in people's minds of what might happen if a determined adversary really tried to do something really serious, almost an act of war or a de facto act of war?
So there are all sorts of things to unpack there. Firstly, there is the way in which this has caught the imagination and attention of the general public. It's probably only the third or fourth time in the last 10 or so years that has happened. Previously, most of those cyber incidents that reached the mainstream news and the high street and the pubs and so forth related to the NHS, a very serious one in London last year, which caused two of London's biggest hospitals to operate at very close to minimum capacity and caused a run on blood transfusion supply. So these things can be extremely serious. Then there's a lot of misunderstanding. So every time something happens, such as Heathrow or indeed the Spain and Portugal electricity outage, which had nothing to do with cyber, there can be a tendency to jump to these conclusions that it's some sort of mysterious cyber attack. This is all too mundane. So I think the lessons of this, there is a difference between what's happened at the co-op and what's happened at M&S. So the co-op, as I understand it, Joe may know differently, some of the co-op shortages are because in order to prevent further unauthorized access, the co-op have voluntarily taken some of their systems online, which has led to these shortages, whereas M&S were effectively kicked out of their own network. But your point, James, I think is really crucial. There are parts of the UK, and again, the co-op was hit by a cyber attack in Sweden 4 years ago, and the same is true in Sweden, where it's the only source of food retail for miles and miles and miles, and that's really, really disruptive. And food's an interesting sector. I remember during the pandemic when I was still in government, and you're looking at what makes this society function in a place where people can't go out and meet as normal. And you look at energy, you look at telecoms, you look at finance, and you look at food. And food's interesting because it's clearly a strategically important sector. Of course it is, but there's no single company that we can't live without. The co-op is actually in some areas about as close as you're going to get. So there are other sectors where, the National Grid, BT, whatever, where there are individual companies that we need to make sure are properly protected, because if that one company goes down, you're really going to feel it. And then we have to look at, if it's 3 of these at once, what if it's 10? What if it's 20? That's the real lesson. So rather than panic about data security, there are some really important data sets, medical data sets, mortgage security clearance data sets. But there's almost this fatigue and lack of understanding. Oh, my customer data is in peril. I'm going to have my bank emptied. That's not really the way it works. The lesson for this is we've got to be more resilient. We've got to be able to withstand these things better. And we've got to be able to recover for them. Because if you give any British citizen a choice of 2 bad options, one is their essential service is going to be withdrawn, and the other is some of their personal data is going to leak. Neither of those options are good, but everybody will go for the second one as the lesser of 2 evils.
I think what you said, James, I've been doing this job now for a little while, and certainly the last couple of years, whenever anything happens to do with online lives, everyone jumps to conclusions. It's got to be cyber attack. Usually the Russians, they're always pointing fingers. And I think, as Ciaran mentioned then, it's usually the mundane. It's normally someone has forgotten to renew a certificate for a piece of software. Sometimes it's squirrels chewing through wires.
Literally.
But I think what we're living through now with the retail attacks is that there is just such a fear that we are under attack. Our high streets are under attack. And of course, the hackers will be loving this as well, because it's all about power. It's all about money.
Okay, so although Ciaran says that the stolen data is not necessarily the most important thing here, and I should say that M&S says there is no evidence that the information has been shared, the fact that the information has been stolen, the customer data has been stolen, is the new information today, Joe. So just tell us a bit more about what has happened.
Yes, so it's bad news for customers, I'm afraid. So far, we've been affected in terms of customers by all the things we described, but in the cyber world, we've been waiting for this. We've been worried about this because this is inevitable almost. You know, it's normally always the case that the data is stolen. So it's your name, your date of birth, your physical address, your email address, your phone number. And the bit that troubles me the most is actually your order history. So the hackers have got that. So all the things that I've just described, as Ciaran mentioned, some of that stuff is in the phone book. It's not that sensitive data really, but you could, if you think like a hacker, think like a cyber criminal, what could I do with that if I got hold of that data? Well, I could do a pretty good impersonation of M&S. I could convince some customers that I am M&S on the phone via text or email, using things like purchase history in order to get into this, into an element of trust where I can gain more valuable details. For example, I might get them to transfer some money or something like that. But all these things now are what's going to happen in the kind of secondary attack market for this hack. So the primary attacking has been done. What happens now with the data, we don't know. Will M&S pay to get that data deleted or promise to be deleted? Or will the hackers start publishing it on their darknet website?
And if you do pay, you're creating an incentive for people to do it again, obviously.
But also you don't guarantee your data is deleted. Yeah. Only yesterday there was a story about a school paying, but then the hackers came back a few months later and said, actually, we want more money.
To Joe's point about the severity of today's news, there is a risk from data leakage. It's not what some people panic about, which is the direct emptying of a bank account or the complete compromise of your personal privacy. It is about, as Joe said, better scams, people who are able to target you more, and potentially, we don't know the full details here yet. In the case of the co-op, it's not so much the members but the staff, because according to not least Joe's own reporting, 70,000 staff data sets have been stolen, and that does include passwords. And the point about passwords is everybody reuses them, and so you can profile a co-op staff member and potentially log on to another service that they may use, try the password, and that would give you access. So I think there are, the details matter, and the specific mitigations that you and the advice that you give. So generally, most people who are co-op members and M&S online customers, shouldn't panic, but there are specific subsets of that population you want to pay a bit more attention to. Yeah, but in terms of the public sector, firstly, public sector organisations are prohibited by government policy from paying. So there is comparatively less ransomware in public authorities than there are in private sector authorities, and certainly in the US, where most public services have a private element. And secondly, again, I think we need to be proportionate about this. Public authorities struggle with budgets and so forth, and we've had some serious incidents in the UK in the past. In Redcar and Cleveland in 2019, the local council's servers were encrypted and nothing worked, and you could cope without the waste collection rotas for a few days. You could cope without some of the leisure centres and so forth, but actually vulnerable children's services data was encrypted, so casework was disrupted and so forth, and that is a proper emergency. So for local authorities, service providers, schools and so forth, there are data sets to protect, and in particular children's data can be valuable to criminals, but the really key thing is making sure you can keep those essential services running.
Joe, I want to ask you about this thing called Dragon Force. What is it, and what's that got to do with this?
It's a cybercrime service, so it's kind of like the Google of cybercrime. If you want to, you can use their software to infect your victims, or you can use their darknet leak site to name and shame the victims to try and extort them for money. They are the ones behind the co-op. They told me that they're also behind M&S, and certainly that's other reporting has said that Dragon Force is behind M&S. That's why I keep going on the Dragon Force darknet leak site to see if M&S and co-op are going to pop up. We don't know what's happened with Harrods. They have said nothing, and it might be a false alarm there. But we don't know who the individuals are who are using Dragon Force. So they run effectively, it's like an affiliate system whereby I can use their services to infect and to cause chaos in my victims. I have to give them 20% or something like that, and I take 80%. So the in the cyber world, everyone's looking at the kind of tactics and techniques and procedures, TTPs they call them, that the hackers of M&S and Co-op and potentially Harrods have used, and they're pointing to potentially all this being down to a very loose group of individuals, English-speaking hackers. Certainly, they were English-speaking when I spoke to them. Potentially young, potentially even teenagers, who are maybe in the UK or the US.
Ciaran, last question: why can't the UK catch these people, or indeed any other country catch them?
Normally in cybercrime, certainly in ransomware, about 3/4 of it comes from Russian-speaking areas, and particularly the Russian Federation itself. So that answers itself. It's a safe haven. I wouldn't rule out in this case, unusually, there being some form of arrest because, as Joe said, they appear to be native speakers of English. If it is the group that is rumoured to be part of, and we're not clear about that, one of the original leaders of the group is actually in custody in California, originally from Scotland, arrested in Spain. So when these criminals operate out of Western jurisdictions, arrests and interdictions do happen. But normally they don't because they operate from safe haven. So hopefully in this case, there will be that deterrent effect, and these people will be brought to justice.
Ciaran, it's so interesting, as always, to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Joe, lovely to talk to you as well. It was really fascinating. Thank you. Now, as promised, we are turning our attention to Saudi Arabia, and to be specific, the capital, Riyadh, because that is where Donald Trump is. But far more importantly, is where Sarah Smith, North America editor and Americast host, is. Hello, Sarah.
Hi there. Yes, I'm here following Donald Trump all the way around the 3 Gulf states that he's going to be visiting, starting with Riyadh in Saudi Arabia,
where he has announced the biggest of all time, the biggest arms deal ever, so he says.
Yeah, and it is pretty big. It's over $140 billion worth of warfighting equipment sales to Saudi Arabia, including jets and all kinds of bits and pieces. I mean, this is one of the reasons why Donald Trump loves coming here, of course, is because you can do huge deals with some of the wealthiest countries on earth. So there's that defense deal, the biggest ever, as he claims. But also he's talking about investment. He brought some of the richest men in the world and some of America's biggest, most prominent business leaders with him. And as he put it, they're all going to be walking away with lots of checks because they're here to sign investment deals with Saudi Arabia. And Donald Trump hopes attract millions of dollars to the United States, which will then create more jobs and prosperity, he thinks, and allow him to show his voters that he really is delivering on America first, like he promised, because he did tell everybody, he wasn't going to get embroiled in all sorts of international conflicts and foreign affairs. He was going to concentrate on delivering for Americans at home. And so although he is currently halfway around the world, it is with the aim of trying to do these huge economic deals to benefit America.
Yeah, but what, of course, that involves, and particularly on some, well, obviously on arms, but also on some of the other deals, such as they're talking about AI, they're talking about, the critical minerals used in advanced manufacturing, they're talking about energy as well. In all of these, he is, as you say that he can say, right, I'm focused on America, I'm focused on American jobs, but previous US presidencies, previous occupants of the White House have been concerned about jumping so happily into bed with some of these states, which themselves are pretty close to some of America's long-term rivals, such as China, Russia, and Iran.
Oh, and not only that, there are all sorts of human rights concerns. But of course, Donald Trump overlooks all of these kind of human rights concerns. And that's one of the reasons why these kind of countries love doing business with him so much. He's given a speech, though, this afternoon where he kind of brings all of this together. And he says, look, it is through trade and commerce and economic development that the Middle East is going to get itself out of violence and chaos and work its way towards a prosperous future. And he has heavily criticized other American administrations and people he would characterize as liberal do-gooders who've got involved in the Middle East, either in conflict or in nation building or in all sorts of different ways. They've involved themselves in trying to settle some of the intractable problems in the Middle East. and have not succeeded. And he's saying, look, I actually am going to see a way through this because it's all about economic development. It's not about interference. And this is the way forward. Now, I mean, that's one point of view, but it's the one he takes very strongly. And it is how he's squaring the circle of saying, you know, that there is also not just good for America in all of this, but that his way of doing business will actually lead to global good as well.
Let's just have a listen to a little bit of those exact points that you're talking about, Sarah, from his speech.
Transformations have been unbelievably remarkable. Before our eyes, a new generation of leaders is transcending the ancient conflicts of tired divisions of the past and forging a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos, where it exports technology, not terrorism, and where people of different nations, religions, and creeds are building cities together, not bombing each other out of existence. We don't want that.
I thought this speech said, and I'll be much more interested to hear your take than mine, but for what it's worth, I thought this was one of the more detailed expositions of what you might call the Trump doctrine in terms of his foreign affairs approach. A full-throated denunciation, really, of decades of US foreign policy, especially under neoconservatives, so-called nation builders, as he put it. And also within that, doing something that we've become used to him doing in both his terms, but which used to be completely taboo, which is attacking previous American presidents and explicitly criticizing their foreign policy on the international stage. And as you say, you know, contrasting the democratically elected Joe Biden's leadership unfavorably with that of a man who American intelligence assesses ordered the murder of a journalist, Jamal Khashoggi.
Yes, so I think you're right that it was a more detailed exposition of Donald Trump's foreign policy and also quite unprecedented in a number of different ways. It was also really striking that, of course, you know, he's talking about transcending violence and chaos in the Middle East, but he is speaking at a time when atrocities are still occurring in Gaza, in a desperate humanitarian situation there. And he had one small line where he said that the Gazan people deserve a better future, whilst also criticising Hamas for the October 7th attacks. Most people in the audience would have wanted to hear a much, much stronger defence of Gaza and ideally his view as to how there would be a path to Palestinian statehood. But getting back to what you were saying, he has always been against the interventionist tendencies, not just of Democrats when they've been in the White House in America, but also of Republicans as well. And this is one of the ways in which he's completely reshaped the Republican Party. He has removed from his administration any of the people who want America to get involved as a global policeman or think that it is America's job to sort out these global conflicts by actually putting boots on the ground. He is 100% opposed to that. He thinks that America's way forward is through this path of economic development that he's described, but also there's just nothing in it for America to commit blood and treasure to other people's conflicts. And that's one of the ways he is completely changing America's view of where it is in the world that is in conflict with many, many presidents who have gone before him who'd be seen as hawks on the world stage.
And to come back to Gaza, Sarah, which you mentioned there, is there any sense that it's going to come up at all, that it will be discussed? I mean, I suppose there's a world in which some of these Arab states, some of these Gulf states are pretty keen to put some pressure on Donald Trump to do more to end the suffering of the Palestinian people on a day when we're hearing the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying troops are going to go back into Gaza with full force. And the BBC is also speaking to doctors in Gaza because West media are banned from reporting there, talking about malnutrition. Do you think it will come up?
Oh, inevitably. It was obvious when he was making that speech this evening that everybody there wanted to hear him say more about Gaza and that this is the one tension that's going to run through this trip. One of Donald Trump's greater diplomatic aims eventually is to try to persuade Saudi Arabia to sign up to something called the Abraham Accords, which are a set of agreements that were put together during his first term with other Arab countries agreeing to normalise their relations with Israel. He would love to get Saudi Arabia to sign up to that. That would be a huge diplomatic prize for him. That's not going to happen while the conflict is going on in Gaza at the same time, and he knows that. So issues like that have had to be parked as he and his Gulf partners kind of agree to disagree on Gaza. They'd love to see Donald Trump putting far more pressure on Israel to rein back in that conflict, but they know that's not going to happen. So they have enough in common that they're able to press forward without worrying about that. But at the same time, until there is a resolution there, Donald Trump won't really be able to do what he wants to in the Middle East to its fullest extent. And
a big success for Donald Trump in the last day or two, Sarah, has been securing the release of this American hostage. Well, tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, and that, of course, happened just before he came on this trip. So that was a very, very important thing for the administration to be able to do. And isn't it fascinating, actually, the number of different conflicts just in the last few days Donald Trump's been involved with? So there was the release of the last American hostage who was alive and being kept in captivity in Gaza. At the same time, he was taking credit for having talked India and Pakistan back from the brink of a very serious conflict. In fact, he claims he saved millions of lives because he stopped a nuclear war starting between those nations. There's ongoing American talks with Iran about trying to stop it from getting a nuclear weapon. Over the weekend, there were these huge talks with China about getting rid of trade tariffs, not to mention, of course, the fact that there's a strong possibility that Russia and Ukraine will meet in Turkey to talk about ending that conflict this week. And Donald Trump has said if it would be helpful, he'll fly in there too. This is somebody who said he wanted America to withdraw from the world. We've talked about how America has withdrawn from interventionist policies in terms of actually committing troops and getting involved. But goodness me, isn't Donald Trump spread thin around the world as a deal maker, as a peacemaker? He would love to see himself and getting involved in all of these different issues when he promised actually that he was going to spend most of his energy dealing with the problems inside America, not all around the world.
And not only that, Syria. He's lifting sanctions on Syria as well, and going to meet the new leadership. Is that right?
Yes, he is going to meet the new president in Riyadh tomorrow, I think, before he heads off. And this was just a sudden addition to his schedule that wasn't on the books before. And it was a surprise in the speech that he gave this evening. And it certainly wasn't in the prepared remarks that were released to the press earlier, when he said that the US was going to move to normalise relations with Syria for the first time in over a decade, and that they would lift the economic sanctions, something that Syria needs because it is in a terrible economic state after over 10 years of a civil war there. But yeah, an interesting diplomatic move from Donald Trump that was hugely welcomed by his Saudi hosts here as well. You could see Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, looking enormously grateful for that. And Donald Trump even said, the things I do for you, I do too much for you because I like you so much. They have been joined at the hip all day since the moment Donald Trump stepped off Air Force One. And you can see that the friendship those two men have is actually probably going to be a diplomatically important force over the next few years.
And oh my goodness, Sarah, it was lavish. I mean, that's not a surprise, but just describe it. What was it like?
Completely over the top. I mean, lavish, opulent, and Donald Trump loves this stuff. So from the moment he stepped off the plane, instead of a red carpet, there was this huge lavender-coloured carpet lining the steps down from the plane all the way across the tarmac. He'd picked a tie that matched it. You know, you normally see him in a red tie, but he had a purple-shaded one on as he came down the steps to be greeted by the Crown Prince. There were Arabian horses forming an honour guard that trotted alongside his limousine as it took him to the Royal Palace. Donald Trump loves this stuff. I mean, he would want to have the trappings of a royal himself if he could. And this is one of the reasons, of course, why he enjoys visiting the Gulf so much. There were then a series of meetings in rooms, I would say the size of a football field, but they looked as though they were bigger than that. I mean, all the men who were lined up in there looked tiny, lost in these enormous rooms. Crystal chandeliers the size of a tank practically hanging above them. At one point, there was a signing ceremony where the Crown Prince and the American president were signing these memorandums of understanding between America and Saudi Arabia. And they were so far apart, you wondered if they could barely see each other because some of these rooms were so big. And it hasn't happened yet, but this evening there's going to be a dinner in the middle of a UNESCO World Heritage site of amazing Saudi Arabian site. And that too is bound to be lavish and opulent. And, you know, everything here is gilded, of course, exactly as Donald Trump likes to decorate his properties. So, yeah, this is his happy place, I would say, Donald Trump being greeted like this, treated like royalty in the Gulf.
Right. The last thing I want to ask you about is this plane, Sarah. This plane that the government of Qatar has offered to give to Donald Trump, and it's in Texas at the moment. It's a Boeing 747, a jumbo jet, a double-decker plane. What's going on with that?
Okay, this is an astonishing story, isn't it? So this is a particularly luxurious plane, $400 million worth of it, and photos have been circulating on the internet. You can see them of the interior of it. It's got, two different decks. It's got all of these cream leather seats, different little kind of seating and breakout areas, and I mean, it's as fancy as the interior of any private jet I've ever seen pictures of.
And you've seen plenty, Sarah. You've seen plenty.
Never been on one, I have to admit. But yes, you do. You see plenty of pictures of Donald Trump sat on different private planes, and this is definitely the fanciest jet. So, and he's seen it himself in real life. It was actually in Florida at the start of this year, and he toured around it, so he knows exactly how nice it is. The Qataris want to give it to him, well, for nothing, he says. His critics, including some actually of his political allies who are very against this deal, they say, you know, nothing is for nothing and there will be a price. And it's ever more dangerous if you don't know what it is that the Qataris would want in return for this extremely generous gift. So there's been harsh criticism of him from all sides of the political spectrum for even considering taking the gift of this plane. But Donald Trump says, look, I would be stupid not to if somebody wants to give me a valuable aircraft like this for nothing. And the reason he's keen is that he is sick of Air Force One, which is really old, actually, the planes that they use to ferry the president around. He ordered new ones in his first term from Boeing, which should have been delivered around about now. But as always with these things, there have been significant delays, and it's going to be at least 2027 before those new planes are delivered. So he has seen this particularly attractive one, which he thinks he could refit, turn into Air Force One, and fly around the world in considerably more comfort than he does at the moment. And he seems to genuinely not be able to see what the problem is with accepting a gift like this from another government. And, of course, what some of Donald Trump's supporters say is this is the great thing about him. He is open and transparent about all of these deals, so you don't have to worry about things going on behind the scenes. He does it right in front of your eyes.
Well, yes, there's also a whole lot of other questions about the security and intelligence capabilities of that plane and whether it would have to be retrofitted, but that's maybe for another day. Donald Trump says it's his happy place, Sarah, but is it yours?
I am enjoying myself, and I have never been to Saudi Arabia before, nor Qatar or the UAE, where we are visiting on this trip. It is very, very hot, James, and Scottish people are not made to stand in 100-degree heat, as I think you very well know.
No, we're not.
So I would not say it is my favourite place on earth, but goodness me, it is a fascinating trip to be on.
Yeah, and it's really, really good to hear your take on it. Sarah, thanks so much.
Thanks, James. Nice to talk to you.
And that's all from this episode of Newscast. Thank you very, very much for listening, watching, experiencing. We're back tomorrow. Bye-bye.